MC Hammer was right, y'all. I can't lie. I know he might have danced funny, sounded corny, and I know them pants was a trip, but he was walking a walk though. He was talking a talk, and this a talk right here too. Oh, shoot. I forgot a verb in that sentence. Damn, I guess I better get on my repentance. I can't be seen slipping. I can't be heard spitting broken English. Even though it's this language that has broken and extinguished my own, once spoken in my home. See, my language sank in the ocean, and I can't let bygones be gone. My words have drowned, lost their air. I lost my breath, lost my cadence. And when you lose your language, well, you tend to lose your way. It's a way of life, intermingled with every word and every single concept, from conception of my culture to my dreams. That's why I'm right here trying to tell you something, but you don't know what I mean. Have you seen my language? Shoot, maybe it fell on the floor, because it's usually stepped on when I walk in the door. See, they hear my R's dropping and they starting to roar, but that's just my tongue reaching for the place it was before, generations before. Don't ignore, I implore. They took us from our home, but it still lives in our core. So you could mind your P's and Q's, but I'ma stay on my G thing. That's right, I speak this English how I want it, man, no matter what you saying, no matter what you claim, Wu-Tang. That's my style when I talk this. I might live in SK, but I'm the cream of the crop. It's my language. It's a swagger that's a dagger to the neck of the state. When they hear it, they just fear it, and that turn into hate. And if you BIPOC, then I know you relate. Well, yo, it's time for a break. A break from the language that confines like a prison. Our words should paint pictures in many colors like a prism. I'm tired of grayscale and black and white code switching. They almost killed my black accent, but now I'm gonna go get it. So if you're planning on correcting me, I hope that you isn't, because no matter the occasion, my black accent has risen. I unburied it from the grave it was born in inside me. They conditioned me to try and put my blackness behind me. Stuff anything that sounded black back down my throat. Well, imagine if it felt like you were starting to choke on your own words every time that you spoke. Well, I could breathe now because my neck is unyoked, and now my black accent can fly with the crow. And you know that MC Hammer was right. MC Hammer was it. Because they tried to crush my black accent, but you know what? It's too legit to quit. Peace.
Wow. I just want to say thank you so much, Khodi, for sharing that piece. It resonated with me and it spoke to me on many levels. And it's something that when I think about my parents' accent especially, and how at times that they have been, sort of discounted for their accent, and it's been seen as a negative thing. Rather than understanding the value and the richness and the multiple languages they speak. So your poem spoke to me on so many levels, and I just want to kind of ask you, what inspired that piece? Where did that come from within you? What caused you to write it?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for your feedback there. I'm glad it could resonate and resonate beyond the black community as well. I think that there are so many layers and takeaways available for all people of color and all people who experience marginalization in singular stories, even from distinct communities. I think with Blaccent, what was so interesting for me, if I can speak personally about my history, so my mother also has an accent. It's Bahamian. We were both born in the Bahamas. And I never, had an accent really growing up because I moved here as an infant. But my mom, she moved here to Canada in her 30s, around there. And so she retained this accent, still does. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful accent. And it doesn't even necessarily denote another language specifically, but certainly a community and a place and a memory of languages that were lost. Right? But these are all things I hadn't thought about really ever growing up. I just saw the ways in which people with accents, especially certain accents, right, were discriminated against or assumed to be of, lower intelligence, or all of these stereotypes that people associate with accents. And what it made me do, and what it made me sort of get drawn into, is this compulsion to perfect my own English, right? To lose any semblance of an accent and to sound like a perfectly well-spoken, homegrown Canadian. And then, once I became more awake and aware of anti-oppression, started doing some training and getting some education from some incredible leaders in the field, I started to understand, and in fact, just sort of more recently with the writing of my book, Stay Up, that while I was running towards this sort of level of English proficiency and this certain standard that was set out for me, I was also running away from something else, right? And I think, we'll probably talk about how much of identity is tied to language. And for me, I realized I was running from my blackness, right? And that was just sort of a rude awakening to have on a personal level. And so once I understood that and understood everything I had lost through this hunt for English proficiency, I started to want to retrace my steps. Pick up some of the pieces that had been lost and left behind. Yeah, and so hence the idea, I guess, of reclaiming and taking ownership and being proud of a black way of speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I think there's so much there that even though you had the focus of the black community in mind, that just really, I think, speaks to all people of color. Mm-hmm. And whether it's language, whether it's accents, whether it's different ways of doing things, that kind of need to put you in a box. Mm-hmm. And you have to purposefully break your way out of that box, and very specifically at times with mm-hmm. the actions that you do. I want to unpack a little bit about what you said when we talk about language being tied to identity, but also language being a tool of colonialism. Mm-hmm. And even, how do you think it impacts colonialism as a whole, the way we speak, but also in the way that we communicate as a whole?
Colonialism is not just about land, but it's also about people and minds especially, right? And certainly, and speech too, right? What are our thoughts without language, for example, right? Oftentimes we're thinking using the language that we use to communicate. And I think, all of the things that are lost with, traditional languages like indigenous languages and things like that, whether they're from here on Turtle Island or from elsewhere, you're not just losing words, but you're losing ideas, philosophies, entire knowledge systems and ways of being and relating to the world. And so if they can take that from us through language, that's taking a lot, right? That accomplishes a lot on behalf of the colonial project. So yeah, if they can regulate us into, communicating in those ways, then they can control us, essentially, is what it boils down to. And we know too, there's safety and kinship in relating to each other through shared language systems, right? Whether that be through an actual different language where we can actually communicate plans and ideas, say escape plans, like how we're going to get out of this place, or something like that, or whether it's just me calling you brother and you knowing what I mean by that, on a deep level. It creates community, kinship, and safety.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think about, my own culture and my own language, and you're so right. I always say to my family and even to my wife, our ability to speak Arabic, another language, is our superpower. And so when we're out in the community, when we're, trying to buy something and we need to talk in a kind of a secret code, that's our power. And that's
amazing.
Something that I want to be able, my kids to have and to know. Obviously, we're here, we're in Canada. English is an important factor of all of that. But there's more to it.
Absolutely.
There's an identity behind your means and willingness to communicate through it all.
Absolutely.
And
That's
so
beautiful.
you did touch on it a little bit, and I kind of want to ask you, how does language shape identity, and maybe more so, what happens to an identity when a language is lost or suppressed?
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose for me, when I think about who I was becoming in my early life, and especially as I tried to chase these, accolades of English proficiency, I was becoming a white person in brown skin, and there's even this sort of this thing called honorary white status that, certain people of color can achieve through things like English proficiency or through changing the way that they dress or present themselves in a room or all of these things. And maybe you can relate to this idea of constantly needing to switch codes depending on which spaces you're in and who you're trying to impress, for instance. And it almost becomes this competitive game where it's like who can speak the widest, act the widest, what have you. And that's sort of in this part of the world, that's the game of life. And if you want to get that certain job or you want to, run in certain circles, that you have to conform and change who you are in order to do that. I think people who don't experience that type of cultural discontinuity will never understand how taxing it can be, really, because it's not power neutral. Right? Every time we say, okay, I have to speak a certain way when I walk into these doors, we are denying ourselves of our true identities, right? And we're denying ourselves of that sense of kinship and community that we could take with us into a room if only we had the guts or the privilege sometimes to do so, the permission even to do so. Right? And so what does that do to a person's sense of self for their own, cultural identity? It starts to sort of break it down and diminish it. And that's where internalized racism really begins to take root and take hold, right? And the more you become accustomed to, entertaining this idea of constantly changing yourself, the less you'll start to know who you truly are. And there goes identity.
Yeah, there's, I feel like when it comes to identity as well, when I think about what you said and how that intertwines with my own situation, my own family, and kind of what I observed, there was very much a need and wanting to leave certain things behind when it came to language, when it came to accents. And even I remember from my parents, right or wrong, they were really adamant that we had very sharp English and that even our accent, we tried to move away from it as much as possible.
Of course.
I also think of times, even something as simple as like I'm calling a restaurant and I'm trying to make an order. And through, my voice, people don't realize that maybe I'm not from here, or maybe I look different.
Yeah.
But as soon as they get my name, I can always hear that switch.
Right, yeah.
Where it's like, oh, Ahmad, okay. And you just feel a little bit of a difference in how they communicate with you, which I think speaks to a lot of trying to fit in with these structures and these systems, even for the most minute things.
Yeah, because you're feeling the judgment, right? You're feeling the judgment that comes. And if you had spoken in your, natural voice, that judgment would have been there from the get-go.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so it's easy to want to hide our identities behind things like sharp English and everything like that. And I guess my, quest is to, sort of convince the world that we shouldn't have to do that. Convince, white folks in white spaces that maybe sometimes they could be more malleable to changes and things like that in their presence rather than us having to bear that weight all the time.
Khodi, you wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, including this one.
Yes, and you have a lot of nice hats, such as the one in front of us, but you also do a lot of things in the community, and one of those things is an educator, a high school educator. So what role do you think education plays, formal or informal, play in either reinforcing colonial language norms or even helping to dismantle them?
Well, that's something I can definitely speak to. I've been an educator of English language arts for almost 20 years. And so I've been through this journey myself, right, where at the beginning of my teaching career, I was very much a tool in this system of colonial language reinforcement. I was the English teacher. I sort of reproduced what happened in my life, where I was molded to fit into this very specific standard. And so my job as an English teacher, I believed, was to help students' language conform to the standard that is set out for them through what we call standard English. Over the years, however, I've become a little bit more, again, awakened to the harms that can bring and cause. And as I talked about, when I was writing Stay Up, I just sort of realized how much my own educational journey caused me to deny my blackness and deny my identity. And I realized, oh my gosh, I've been doing this to students, to my own students, right? And no one would have ever questioned me on it or thought about it. I was just doing my job, right? Marking X's beside, you know, things that were spelled in different ways, or, you know, words like ain't or whatever it might be. Or, you know, poor translations of, you know, one language into English. All of these things, at every turn, I would be trying to correct and massage into this colonial norm. However, you know, I don't even think the curriculum really demands that of us. When you look at the English curriculum, it ironically doesn't even use the word English very often. It talks about language and the art of language and everything like that, and just what it means to sort of compose and create, what it means to comprehend and respond, what it means to assess and reflect on your own use of language, and all of these things. Those are all things you can do using a variety of English forms, or a variety of dialects, and in fact other languages too. And in fact, the English classroom becomes a lot richer when you invite those in. You know, and so for me now, while I understand that there are certain times where it's important that we teach the, you know, standardized version of English, and where we hold students sort of accountable to that standard, that doesn't have to be for all assignments and all moments in time in an English class, right? There are lots of moments and times and assignments and tasks where students can learn a lot from using their own language forms, from learning about other students' language forms in the classroom, and yeah, just having linguistic diversity be present within the space. And it's beautiful. There's now research around this, even in EAL, for example. They're encouraging people to use their home language in the EAL classroom as a jump-off point. It builds confidence, right? It builds interest and creates, you know, relationships with other students from other language groups in the classroom. And it's called translanguaging, and it's a beautiful pedagogical tool that we've essentially been not just ignoring, but really suppressing for years and years and years. So now if a student wants to, you know, write a poem in Ebonics, that's a beautiful thing that I would welcome in, right? If a student wants to, you know, share an oral piece of, writing that they created in their own language that isn't English, that's beautiful. I can still assess all of the things that are meant to assess for a speaking assignment, you know, like enunciation, or like projection, stage presence, eye contact, all of these things. I can do that. Let me do it in a space and in a way where you'll feel most comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly wish you were my English teacher back in the day. So obviously a lot of what you've said very much resonates with me. And as we've mentioned, it'll resonate a lot with people of color a lot. What about people who don't come from these communities, who's maybe never had that experience, who've always fit into that mainstream? How do you think allies should approach people trying to reclaim their language? How do you think they can support? How can they be respectful?
Yeah, well, there's a rhetorical question in my poem. I say, you know, how would you feel if it felt like you were going to choke on every single word that you spoke? You know, and it really, I guess, just speaks to this different experience of life, what it's like to be on the side of privilege rather than the side of disadvantage, when we acknowledge that we're living in a colonial white supremacist society like we are. You know, everything that's happening politically right now in North America is swinging this pendulum far away from anti-racism, and, you know, people are talking about throwing out DEI practices and all of these things. And I think it's so unfortunate because it literally, again, just sort of re-whitewashes the system in which we're in, where people think that because there's a piece of paper that says we're all equal, that we actually are. But this is really about helping people to understand that my experience of life and people who have other language forms, who have accents and things like that, that their experiences of life are vastly, vastly different, and that they're at a vast disadvantage in most cases when it comes to operating within the system in which we live. So it really requires a bit of learning and unlearning. It requires a lot of empathy and understanding. And then, yeah, just retraining expectations, putting on those critical lenses when we're viewing things like media and everything like that. And I think people who want to be allies just really need to make space for that and need to, yeah, create those platforms. If they have privilege, use that privilege to break down the systems that we have right now that are sort of getting in the way of that richness.
Yeah, and you know, lots of this work is obviously current, you know, within the last 5-10 years even, where we're kind of as a society starting to realize these things and potentially head in this direction. Where do you see this going in the future? What do you think 5, 10 years, 20 years, knowing we're laying the foundation and the building blocks down, what does the future look like?
I hope it's a place and a space where everyone can feel welcome to be themselves and to communicate as they wish within all public spaces, and that the people within those spaces can make room for that to happen, right? Where we can stop complaining about accents at the drive-through and everything like this, you know, these things that you hear about and see online where people are being really diminished and sort of downgraded for something as simple as an accent, which it doesn't take that long to become accustomed to or to train your ear to if you really give it a shot, you know. And so that just takes a little bit of work on the part of people whose work it is to do, and I hope that they can do that, and that linguistic diversity will be commonplace.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, brother.